that you kind of alluded to. So
Cool. Awesome. Copy streaming link. Here we go. All right. So let's say 2 minutes, going live in 2 minutes. We're actually live already, but that's fine. Link.
yeah,
All
it
right.
says
I
meeting
posted
is
it on
now
Facebook.
streaming live. I'll try
Awesome.
not to have any hot mic moments here.
All right. Cool. Let's see what happens. Okay, we are live.
Good deal.
All right, we're live. Yeah, cool. Awesome. Don, thanks for coming on the show. I don't know what to call this anymore at this point, but welcome to the stream, man. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, that's
So we're
what.
gonna
Thanks for having
have
me.
some folks joining us. Yeah, no, it's great to talk. Great to see you again. It's been a while, so it's been good to see you. It's been too long, but we got hopefully some folks joining us shortly, and then we'll go from there. But tell us a little more about you and what you do and how you work with clients.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, my primary focus is, as you probably know from our past discussions, is really estate planning, and so really helping people decide how to structure their plan for when they're gone. So a lot of times it'll involve either a trust or will and a trust, or just a will. Powers of attorney, I think I've alluded to in the past, are also important considerations. But like a basic plan usually has at least a will and two powers of attorney. In addition to estate planning, I've been doing some business organizations. It's kind of interesting during COVID. I think people have a little bit that they're not commuting anymore, and they have a little bit more time. And so I've opened up several businesses for folks that are looking at new ventures. Unfortunately, there's been a couple folks who ended up losing their jobs during COVID, and so they decided to open up their own sort of consult them to structure it in a way to minimize or avoid their personal liability for any business activity. So I've been doing a little bit of that. And then sadly, I've also been doing some bankruptcy work for consumers. I mean, people, I think, who are kind of on the edge before COVID have been kind of pushed over the edge during COVID. And, there may be a moratorium on things like foreclosures and evictions, but your credit card bill still arrives every month and you're expected to pay it. And some of those folks just wouldn't. So those are the three areas that I've really been focusing on during COVID. And I try to tell people, especially the bankruptcy people, I try to tell them, look, the bankruptcy code was written for a reason. It's supposed to provide people a fresh start. And so and that's why most of us are paying 18 to 25% interest on our credit cards, because that's factored in. Some of the defaults are factored into their business model. So we pay a little bit more so that folks can get a fresh start. So anyway, but yeah, that's what I've been up to. It's kind of interesting. I think also people have had a lot more time on their hands, and they're all worried about their mortality. So my estate planning business is booming pretty well. And it's, like I said, it's everything from this sort of huge comprehensive plan to just advising people on ways that they can kind of help themselves get things in order.
Sure. That's I mean, it's really valuable stuff, right? I mean, people don't always think about that, and frankly, people don't want to think about it, right? But I mean, just to take a step back for a second, for folks who may not know, what's the difference between a will and a trust? I mean, like, what's just the basic difference between those two things?
Yeah, so wills are really pretty common, and anybody who's seen like a movie or a television show that had somebody pass away and there's a will, it's a pretty straightforward document. It basically says, this is what I want to have happen with my things and my children if they're minors after I'm gone. The challenge with wills is they're subject to being probated. People have probably heard that term, probate or probate court, and it's essentially you have to file this document with the probate court. Judge reviews the document and then authorizes the executor or the personal representative to essentially administer the person's estate. So gather their assets, sell their house, liquidate accounts, transfer things to the beneficiaries. With a trust is essentially a contract. And the idea is you create this contract between yourself as an individual and yourself as the trustee of the trust, and then you transfer your assets into the trust. And the easiest example of that is actually real property. So I end up drafting quite a few deeds, and the property deeds it from one person as an individual to that same person as the trustee of their trust. And so after they pass away, so the idea is the trust owns the assets while they're alive, and the trust owns the assets after they're gone. The only thing that changes is who manages the trust. And so in the trust agreement itself, you appoint somebody to be the successor trustee, and then that person, after you pass away, can manage those assets the same way you could, except they have to follow the instructions for who you want things distributed to. So they're similar documents, but they have very different sort of legal standing. I'll tell you right now, the idea of probate, especially in DC, is kind of a joke. The probate court essentially closed down for 3 months when COVID first started, and they don't really seem to be making much of an effort to catch up. I filed a probate petition in July that still hasn't been acted on. So it's a long process. In normal times, it's an excruciatingly long process right now. So and I know a lot of people think, oh well, I don't really have very much, or I don't, but here's the thing: if you die without a will, you go through that same probate process I'm talking about, except that who gets your things is just dictated by state law. So I try to tell people, plan to live, but plan just in case.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's an uncomfortable conversation to have, but it's a necessary one, right? Especially with things the way they are right now, and there's so much uncertainty around with forget the virus alone, but just in general on a day-to-day basis, we have so much uncertainty. But then you add the pandemic in, and folks are having to deal with this a lot more, right?
Yeah, and honestly, that you raise a really good. The uncertainty is definitely one of the drivers in my business, but I tell people, one of the things I emphasize with regard to those powers of attorneys that I kind of alluded to, it's like those are really important, especially if have any sort of small business or things like, or they don't have a joint bank account, because if somebody gets COVID and they're hospitalized for a while, you're probably going to want somebody to pay the mortgage for them, or pay their bills and things like that. And without a power of attorney, it's just, and if they don't have anybody else on their account, that's not going to happen, right? I guess if you have an auto payment, but at the same time, you might need to move money from one place to another in order for that auto payment to go through. So powers of attorney can be really, really helpful, especially for business affairs, but then also, unfortunately, for healthcare affairs as well. I mean, if you don't if you don't have a kind of advanced directive or anything, you end up having a situation where there could just be a battle over whether or not you should stay on life support or not, even if you're sort of in a permanent coma. So I remember, years ago in Florida, there was this lady who was in a coma, and basically her family fought over whether she should be able to, pass away, or if they're going to keep her on it forever. Which, that's kind of an outlier situation, but it does take place. And I think people prefer to have the peace of mind to know that they're making the decision while they can, so that they don't have to worry about their loved ones fighting over making those decisions later on. So anyway,
Yeah.
Sorry, I think maybe I was rambling on there.
No, not at all. I mean, I think it's valuable to give examples of folks so people can kind of see how it's illustrated sometimes. I mean, because people think about things in like the abstract, right? And it's scale out there. It's never like close to home enough that it actually hits home and resonates with folks. But in reality, I mean, and again, none of this is meant to be scary or to add to the stress that people are already feeling around various situations going on around the world. But it's still, they're, like I said, they're uncomfortable conversations, but they kind of need to happen, because it's actually, if you look at it, it's not adding stress. It's actually controlling what you can control, right? It's preparing for the situation so you don't have to have stress later.
Yeah, I mean, I I tell people all the time that chances are they're not going to know what kind of job, if I did a good job for them or not, right? Because they're not going to be around to see how the plan is put into place. So what I try to do is and I do a good job, don't get me wrong, but I try to make sure that they, I'm providing them the peace of mind to know that, if and when something happens to them, that, their loved ones will be sort of taken care of. It's not unlike, a financial planner is offering, life insurance. I'm just offering sort of that peace of mind to know that they have their affairs in order if something goes sideways all of a sudden.
Yeah. So for the clients of yours that are business owners, what are some unique things that are, or maybe not unique things, but some common issues that business owners face specifically? Because a lot of folks that watch or that connect with me on various social media are business owners or entrepreneurs. So what are some things you can call out for those folks?
Yeah, so one of the things, especially in the estate planning space, is to make sure that you assign the interest of your company to the trust itself. If you do a trust-based plan, that way, whoever your successor trustee is could then step in and either manage the business or wind down the business if something happens to you. From an organizational standpoint, most, I think, folks understand that they don't want to own the business in their own name, because if they own it in their own name, they have personal liability for anything that takes place. And so, I mean, obviously people take out insurance for these reasons, but at the same time, you can also structure your company in a way that shields you from that personal liability with either a simple S corporation or an LLC or an LLP. Mostly an LLC though. LLP is more complicated, but that's sort of the basic structure. I do tell people make sure that they do have insurance, even if they're just doing small consulting, because it ensures that they won't be able to say pierce the corporate veil and go after you personally, because you're shielding your corporate assets in your own name. So having that insurance is important. But one of the other things that I would suggest to people who maybe aren't interested in doing sort of a formal plan, there's actually a lot of informal estate planning that people can do. For example, most people's sort of big ticket items are going to be their real property, life insurance, and retirement accounts, right? To a certain extent, bank and brokerage accounts. With each of those, you can actually assign a beneficiary who would become the owner of those accounts upon your death. So in DC, Maryland, and Virginia, they allow something called a transfer on death deed. So essentially, you file this deed in one of the jurisdictions, and when you pass away, that deed becomes a formal deed that transfers that asset to that person. And then all they need to do is do sort of a conforming deed to convert it over into their name, which is a way of avoiding having to go through that probate process in order to transfer the real property. Similarly, with life insurance and bank accounts, they have either payable or transfer on death designations. So you designate your beneficiary in there. These typically are easiest with people who have small families, to be honest, and potentially adult children, just because it's easier to do that. One of the reasons why people come to me for estate planning is when they want to make sure that they are leaving things to their children, their grandchildren, or other relative. They want to delay when certain people have access to certain funds. But for people who have adult children, and really kind of a finite group of assets, meaning like their houses, retirement accounts, and life insurance, you can do a lot of that planning just by updating your beneficiary designations, and you don't have to spend money with me. Although I do still recommend for everybody, and I think I've mentioned this before when we've talked, the powers of attorney are extremely important for just about everybody, especially people who have a small business, because it allows for that business continuity.
Yeah, that's good to know, man. So in terms of like best practices for things you recommend folks to do for the situation, like, if someone's incapacitated for COVID or some other kind of accident or that kind of thing, what are some, some considerations that people think about when they're, not obviously not quite death level, but incapacitation for a period of time, like you said, can have significant impact on business operations, on insurance, or paying mortgages, that kind of thing, bills in general.
Yeah, well, making sure that you have those documents in place ahead of time is key. I mean, unfortunately, I get calls from folks at times, particularly the children with elderly parents, and they say, "Well, I want to try to help get my parents' affairs in order," and I typically say, "Okay, what tell me about them, what's their condition. I also need to speak with that person specifically." And they go, "Yeah, well, they have Alzheimer's or dementia or things like that." And unfortunately, once that diagnosis has been made, they're no longer competent to enter into any kind of legal agreement. So they can't sign a new will, they can't update a trust document. And so making sure you have these things in place in advance, I think, is critically important. I know a lot of people worry, okay, I'm going to sign over this power of attorney. That means that somebody can go and snoop around my bank account. Well, actually, the way, and I apologize if this is a flashback to law school, Drew, but a lot of these powers are known as springing powers, right? So the power only springs into effect when certain conditions apply. And so, for example, with a married couple, what I generally recommend is they make their power of attorney immediately effective for their spouse, but they make it a springing power for the other folks on the list. And when I say springing, it means it only springs into effect in the event that first the spouse is not available, and that second, a doctor has actually made a certification that you're unable to make your own decisions. In that situation, they would be able to exercise the power of attorney. Without those two conditions being met, no one can do anything with that power of attorney. So I tell people you can share it with your agents, and knowing that they won't be able to exercise it unless you can't make your own decisions, and whoever you've listed to have first isn't available.
It's because so it's not like there's no such thing as too early or too often to kind of review these things and get involved in these kind of conversations, but there is such thing as too late.
Yeah, there's definitely too late. It's funny. I had some clients reach out to me recently. They have a daughter off to college, and she's at UVA. She's actually at UVA, and they were because she just turned 18. They no longer have the ability to sort of access her medical records or deal with her financial account. So I ended up doing powers of attorney for them to have for their daughter, so that they could kind of continue to be able to access that. And I clearly the daughter gave them the permission, but and she's 18 years old, and they want to be able to help her manage things, which makes perfect sense, because just because you turn 18 doesn't mean suddenly you're a financial wizard and know how to manage all of your financial accounts or deal with the health system.
That's really fascinating, actually, because you don't think about wills or trusts or even power of attorney as something that someone who's 18 or even in their 20s would even need to think about, right? And so that kind of thought is really, really interesting, because even I didn't think about that way, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I have not really, this is the first time I've been approached by folks that were in this category, but it seems obvious now that, you'd want to be able to, or your child might want you to be able to continue to help them and not have to, have them on the phone or get permission every time they need to do something. And this power of attorney lets them help the kid, when they can.
Yeah, because I mean, it's extremely important. I mean, if especially for a kid who's away at college, something happens, then the parents are
Right.
basically in the dark. They can't do anything about it. So that's really
Right.
interesting. So for taking that example, actually, and applying it to someone who's again, maybe not in college, but maybe like living away from their parents, away from their majority of their immediate family or something like that, or someone who travels a lot for work, that might be something that they might consider, even no matter what age they're at as well.
That absolutely. I mean, I think it applies to everybody, but if you're in a spot where you have you know more opportunities for something to go wrong, you're traveling more, there's obviously, if you have a long commute, things like that, you're more potentially exposed. If you're a business owner, you should absolutely have a power of attorney, so that you're I mean, if you're like me, my business, if something happens to me, my business basically just goes away because it's really just me. But other people, and if you own a restaurant, or if you, I guess people don't really own restaurants anymore, but if you you own a business that sort of continues to operate, you're still going to need someone to make the ultimate decisions on what happens there. And if you're in a coma and no one has the power of attorney, then you basically have a bunch of people acting by fiat, which sort of exposes them, puts your company at risk, that they're making decisions that you wouldn't have made, and frankly aren't authorized to make those decisions, right? So having those powers of attorney for small businesses is really important, and they're generally written in a way that allows an agent to act on their behalf while they're incapacitated, but then once they regain their capacity, the power of attorney terminates. And so it really is only effective when the person is unable to make their own decisions or unable to act. So, if you're unconscious for an extended period of time, obviously you can't act. When you wake up, if you're lucid, the power of attorney goes away and you continue to manage your things on your own.
So not to throw a law school hypothetical at you, but in terms of if you have a business
Oh,
where
good.
you're operating with partners, right? Or if you have a couple people who own the business together in conjunction, what are some considerations around that? Because I know there are folks who have that situation as well.
Sure. Well, I mean, hopefully, if you have a bunch of different owners of a business or co-owners of a business, you have an operating agreement that sort of delineates responsibility and whatnot within the organization. But if say the business owner has a controlling interest in the business, you definitely want to have somebody in place who can exercise that control in the event that that person cannot. Um, you can either do that through the actual operating agreement itself, or you could do that through a separate sort of power of attorney that I was sort of talking about before. But putting those type of things in place ahead of time is crystal clear, or is really important. One of the other things, and I know lawyers like to paper everything, but a lot of times, having sometimes people will end up going into business together, and they potentially buy property together, right? Um, and I highly recommend that you have an agreement between the parties, whether it's residential or commercial real estate, at how the property would be dissolved or resolved in the event of the partnership dissolves or something to that effect, or one of the partners passes away. For example, in California, my dad and my niece, they co-own an almond orchard, right? And so they essentially have a residential co-ownership agreement that delineates who's paying the taxes, who reaps the benefits of the almonds, things of that nature, and sort of how long the agreement lasts. My dad ended up putting a large down payment on the property. My niece had then took out a mortgage, and so she pays the mortgage. He's kind of prepaid and is kind of paying himself back with the proceeds from the almond sales. And so, but having that agreement in place to make sure that his interest is protected, their interest is protected, and there's not somebody like me who'd come in after the fact and say, okay, well, we need to sell this property because it half belongs to my dad after he passes away, because they have an agreement that protects them from having that happen. That's one of the things that you do when you're trying to do these plans too. A lot of times people, especially if people remarry later in life, they want to leave things to children from a previous relationship, but they don't want to leave their current spouse sort of out to dry. So we draft up documents that will include something called a life estate. I know this is a flashback. A life estate in a piece of real property, so the person continued to stay in the house and they don't have to worry about, their late spouse's children trying to sell the house out from under the person, right? And so there's a bunch of different ways that you can sort of protect interest through those kind of arrangements as well. So I know I like to paper things, but the paper does help.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be a thing if it wasn't a thing, right?
Exactly.
No, it's good to know, man. I mean, it's great information, and I know some folks might be thinking it's kind of dry, and some of it is because it's law, right? Legalese, a lot of it, but it's necessary dryness, right? It's like,
look, I have no illusions that people really want to talk to me, right? It's like no one really wants to think about their death. No one wants to think about what's going to happen if something happens to their kids. No one wants to think about being in a car accident and being in a coma. But unfortunately, those are the type of things that sometimes happen in life. And so we can ignore them, or we can try to give yourself that peace of mind to know that you've planned for this an unfortunate contingency and then hope it never happens. It's kind of like buying insurance, right? You buy insurance for your car just in case you get in an accident. Sure, okay, you didn't get an accident this month, so you wasted that money. Did you really? I don't think so, because you've had like the peace of mind to know that if something goes wrong, the person that you hit with your car isn't going to take your house, right? So it's the same kind of idea.
Yeah, definitely. So we got a couple people watching. So if anyone wants to ask a question, please feel free to put that in the chat. We can answer that for you. But in the meantime, if you want to tell Don, if you want to tell us how folks can get in touch with you if they want to, I'll put that into the description below. Once you tell us how that works, so that way,
Sure.
if people have questions and that kind of thing, they can always reach out to you.
Yeah. So the easiest way would probably be to send me an email. I belong to a few prepaid legal service plans, so people constantly call me on the telephone. And I generally will screen people out. I'm just being honest. But if you email me, there is a 100% chance that I will respond. And so my email, I'm going to see how this works here. Hold on just a second. How is it? Can you,
there we go. Yep.
Right.
There it is. Cool.
Yeah. So my email address is don@lincolnparkassociates.com. My phone number is there too. If you text me, I'm more likely to respond to your text than to pick up the phone if you call me, unless we've already talked and then I see your name on there and I'll answer. But that's the easiest way to get a hold of me. Oops, I shouldn't hold on that side. Yeah, Don.
I think you're good. Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
I'll put it
Don at LincolnParkAssociates.com. Yeah, that's great. That's the easiest way. I do a lot of things through email now and frankly Zoom calls. I do still like to meet, like to virtually meet with people. One of the challenges during COVID is finalizing the documents, and so what I end up doing is the governor of Maryland and the mayor of DC have issued executive orders allowing for remote witnessing of certain documents. And so what I do is I have two witnesses sort of pre-witness all the documents. I will pre-notarize the documents, and then I usually just show up at the person's house. We'll do a Zoom call so that the witnesses can actually watch the person sign. I will watch the person sign, verify their name as required as a notary, and then they have those documents. Because unfortunately, estate planning is still kind of this Byzantine, paper-driven industry, which requires kind of the so-called wet signature on the documents to determine their authenticity. So. But that's generally how that works. But I do most everything by email now, and answer people's questions. Or if I also usually have a Zoom call right at the beginning both so I can see the people, because I definitely miss seeing people, and sort of try to build a little bit more rapport, because it's hard to, this is already difficult enough to connect with people, to talk about, their mortality. Just doing it over the telephone is makes it even more daunting.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine having those conversations with someone you've never actually seen or met, talking about your own mortality, talking about the worst case scenario, literally. Then that's got to be kind of
Right.
awkward.
It is kind of interesting. Before COVID, there were a few people who I really never had met. They reached out via email. We had a conversation, a back and forth. We might have spoken on the phone, because I wasn't really big into the Skype or the Zoom calls before. Um, and then I would actually meet with them for the first time when they signed the documents in my office. Now I usually will at least see them ahead of time, but I really only meet them at the end, which is, it is what it is, I guess. We're trying to do the best we can here, but it's still kind of an odd situation where you've been working with somebody for weeks or a couple months, and you only actually meet with them once right at the end. So anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's a new world, right? It's a new paradigm we're living into
Yep.
right now. But yeah, man, no, that's great. Great. Thanks so much for coming on. No one asked any questions, so we can,
Absolutely.
I'm sure folks will reach out to you. But yeah, good considerations. The bottom line is definitely looking to getting a will or a trust and at least a power of attorney to get things. Make sure you're protected. You got the peace of mind to keep things going, especially if you have business. If you want to continue ensure business continuity, and the bills are paid, that seems to be the
Yeah,
real thing.
exactly. Cool. Hey, thanks for having me on.
No, appreciate it, man. Thank you for coming. And yeah, you guys, anyone have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Don. I've worked with him personally. He's awesome, and he's really responsive. And yeah, I can highly recommend Don. So that's why he's on here talking to us. So thanks again, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks, man.